I reread it and I was like, no. I'm going to tell you about The Ethical Slut, which is a classic non-monogamy text. It was written by Janet W. Hardy and Dossie Easton, who also wrote The Topping Book, The Bottoming Book, When Someone You Love Is Kinky, a lot of books on sex positivity and kink and non-monogamy. This is probably their most famous book. It was written originally in 1997. Today I have with me the third edition, which came out in 2017. Probably every non-monogamous person has been recommended The Ethical Slut at least once, and it is, I don't intend this to be a rant review or a hit piece. I think there's a lot of great stuff in here. A lot of the information on safe sex is very good. The chapter on jealousy has a lot of practical advice. The advice on parties is really solid. But there's also some truly unhinged advice in here. And I feel like the best way to read it is with other non-monogamous people who can kind of give you a baseline. So today, let me be your book club. Let me be your non-monogamous friend. What in this is realistic and what in this is completely bizarre. So I have made this tier list. Hot tip, that's good advice. You might have never heard it even if you've been non-monogamous for a while. Good 101, I didn't find it really useful, but someone who is just starting out with non-monogamy or has maybe like a lot of purity culture or something that they're unlearning, they might find it really useful. Mixed feelings, that's for anything where I've got some mixed feelings. I don't know what to tell you. Really, for anything where I was like, I don't think that happened the way you said it did. There's a lot of anecdotes in this where I am not getting the same moral that the authors got. Or for things where I'm like, I don't think so. Don't do this. It's like, no, don't do that. And then WTF is for the things where I'm like, I know. Absolutely not. What were you thinking? Now that we have our categories and I have lashes on. In my last video, even with mascara on, it looks not just like I don't have eyelashes, but like I've never heard of eyelashes. Like I'm from an alien species where none of us have them. So I bought fake lashes. It's not fun. Shout out to drag queens and femi girls, because this is awful. Good for you guys. I've also got the page numbers marked so you can read along or look at the greater context of whatever it is that I'm quoting. All right, first up we have Kinsey's statistics from back in the 1940s indicated that slightly more than half of relationships that are theoretically monogamous in fact involve sexual contact with outside partners. And that I am going to put in hot tip, not because I think it'll actually change anyone's behavior, but it's a great thing to bring up when you are arguing with your parents about non-monogamy. You can just be like, well, greater than 50% chance you're non-monogamous too, which might make them start fighting with each other instead of with you. And either way, we'll make Thanksgiving more fun. In chapter 2, they have a myths about sluts section. It felt kind of like, yeah, I'm aware, I'm fine. But I could see where it could be useful for someone who is new to sex positivity or is still unpacking a lot of purity culture. Good 101. My first moment is in Sluthood, The Next Generation. They have this little bit where they talk about how they've updated for the new generation, feedback they've gotten from younger people. One of the things is eco-sex is the new paradigm for many people our age, taking the earth as our powerful lover and treating her huge energies with gentleness and respect. And I think someone's fucking with them. Or they're fucking with us, or they're just taking an incredibly narrow sample size. I don't think this is massively common. I'm a younger millennial, and I hang out with a lot of like really annoying, beautiful, wonderful, new age people. Hey babes, if this were common, I would have heard of it. I don't know who they asked. I don't know how serious the person they asked was, but I'm gonna go ahead and put this in. Really? Another issue that I have with this book is that it has an incredibly broad definition of sex. Sex is anything you do or think or imagine that sets the train in motion. A scene in a movie, a person on the street you think is hot, swelling buds of wildflowers bursting in a meadow, a fragrance that opens your nose, the warm sun on the back of your head. Right now, we're writing about sex and you're reading what we have to say about it. You're having sex with us. Our best definition is that sex is whatever the people engaging in it think it is. I'm all for expanding the definition of sex so that we're not trapped in some like heterosexual hellscape where only one thing counts. But when we get so broad that it's like, the flowers are sex, a rainstorm is sex, talking to someone someone is sex. Eating an ice cream is sex. The definition has been brought into the point of uselessness and also loses its practicality for the audience that really consumes this book, which is non-monogamous people. Someone might ask, like, have you had sex with anyone since the last time we were together? And it's not useful if you're like, well, I did watch a sunset with 3 other people, so maybe that was a foursome. Like, that's just not useful. So I'm gonna put that in really. Get yourself a group calendar and use it. Some of the online calendars where everyone can enter appointments and see what other appointments others have made work well for this. And I'm just like, yeah, we all know that Google Calendar is in the Poly Starter Pack along with the Signal app and a box of latex gloves. So I'm just gonna put it in Good 101. I'm also not wild about the way that they talk about cheating in this book. One point they describe it as non-consensual non-monogamy. They also write, perhaps you find yourself in the position of sleeping with someone who's cheating. Whatever you think about the ethics involved, different sluts make different choices on this one. It is certain that difficulties can arise when your lover's partner doesn't know about your connection. And then they focus on the inconvenience of being with someone who's cheating. They don't really address the ethics of it. It felt kind of weird to be bringing up non-consensual non-monogamy, aka cheating, in a book that's about ethical behavior because they don't really delve into it. It's sort of brought up and then dismissed. I think this one is a mixed feelings. There's this long story that Dossie tells about a relationship where the other person was jealous, and I'm just gonna read you some of it so you can get the gist. My lover is late coming home. I hope she is all right. This morning she left in tears. Last night we both cried until very late. I hope she will not be too angry with me, or then again her anger might be easier to bear than her pain. Last night I thought my heart would break from feeling her pain. And it's my fault, my choice, my responsibility. I'm asking my lover to go through the fire of reasons most of the rest of the world consider frivolous, if not downright reprehensible. I cannot, will not be monogamous. My lover is back. She brought me a flower. She still doesn't want a hug. She feels her house has been invaded by alien energy. Why did I insist on doing this? My co-author and I have been patiently waiting to resume this part of our relationship when my newfound and beloved partner was ready. Dossie and Janet are lovers as well as writing partners. She had already conquered the terrors of group sex. Within the last year, she has had more new sexual experiences than she had in the previous 48 years and has taken to it all like a duck to water, except her lover having a date with one other person. She hates feeling left out and resents that we are doing it in our home this time, not neutral territory. Maybe this was a mistake. She resents me for every miserable, terrified thought she has had today. She is furious that I would subject her to the unprotected experience of her own feelings, and that's not what she said, that's my interpretation. She is furious with me, and I am not giving myself permission to defend myself, and I hurt. And then it says, it's been 20 years since Dossie wrote this story, and she is no longer with this lover. The relationship ended for many reasons, none of them particularly about jealousy. And it felt like a very weird story to me for a couple of reasons. First, I'm kind of like, I don't know. Are you sure it wasn't particularly about jealousy? I mean, maybe some more details. I'm curious. I want to know. My own nosiness and skepticism aside, the whole thing about subjecting her to the unprotected experience of her own feelings feels a little bit patronizing to me, kind of weird. Yeah, I do think it was a bit of a mistake to say that you want to bring your other partner into the home when you know that the other person living there feels very invaded by that. Go to a hotel, go to the other person's place, go to a dungeon, go to a friend's house. If her partner that she's writing about had been super experienced with non-monogamy, then I think there's a little more ground to be like, hey, if we're nesting partners, I need to be able to bring other people over. I'm very curious about the circumstance that led to, like, we're living together, but my partner is still really, really struggling with non-monogamy. If you're dating someone who's super new to being non-monogamous, you have to kind of expect that they're gonna have some reactions like this, that they might be very territorial or really struggle at first, that they might find out that it's not for them, which is why there are lots of polyamorous people who will say, oh, I don't date anyone who's in their first year or first 3 years or first 5 years of poly, because they don't want to deal with all of this. It kind of felt like they dated someone very new, moved in with them, which is a choice, and then didn't seem to fully anticipate the type of problems that would cause. And the framing of like, oh, and I'm not even allowed to defend myself. And I get how that can be a painful and frustrating situation, but I'm also like, you made these choices, and the way that you're framing them feels both naive and patronizing toward the other person. This really feels like a journal entry, and Lord knows I'm a complete psycho in my journals. But I also don't publish my journal entries in a book that hundreds of thousands of people are going to read. So overall, I'm gonna give this a really. One thing they say is abundance is entirely available. And they talk about how like giving love to one person doesn't mean you're taking it away from another. And that felt a little bit trite to me, but I was also like, it's fine. It's fine 101. They have advice about like where to find other sluts. And some of it feels a bit dated where they're like, try searching the web for Ethical Slut. I'll just bring up the book, but whatever. And polyamory with Munch and Meetup. But then they also give some more unique and accurate tips. Try your local Society for Creative Anachronism and other historical reenactment groups, and know that many Renaissance fairs are practically sluts trade conferences. Check out science fiction conventions or live-action role-playing game groups. If your sluttery has a spiritual leaning, many groups of neo-pagans are far more open than traditional Judeo-Christian religions to alternative lifestyles. Atheist and skeptic groups also include more than their share of people interested in exploring sluttery. All of that is true. Rationalist groups also almost exclusively non-monogamous. I don't think I've ever met a monogamous rationalist, but if you're out there, hit me up in the comments and we can, trade stories about Bob and Alice. That's a rationalist joke. That's niche. Rock climbing, acro yoga, board game groups, D&D groups especially, Burning Man, any type of burner community, any non-centrist political group, whether that's leftist or libertarian, as long as it's not like a Christian nationalist group, you'll probably be able to find other non-monogamous people there. And burlesque. So I'm gonna go ahead and call this a hot tip. Say one way to think about possible agreements is to consider the potential emotional cost to each person involved. Your cost is what you risk feeling that might be difficult or painful. A conversation about each person's emotional cost can clear a lot of foggy air and clarify what's getting in the way of making an agreement that feels stuck. I'm also just gonna be a little petty, sorry, but it's weird to have clear a lot of foggy air and then clarify. It's just unnecessarily repetitive. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of overlap between people who are great writers and also have good things to say about relationships. I think Esther Perel is like the one person, she's Belgian, that's what it is. I wanted to talk about emotional cost just because I want to elaborate on this idea. There was something that I had told him was okay for him to do with another partner, but that I didn't really feel that great about. But I did say yes, and it ended up costing me a lot emotionally for a very long time. He was like, well, why did you say yes if it was going to be so high cost? And I was like, I feel like I was really honest with you about the fact that it would be high cost. I told you that I wasn't happy about it. And he thought that it was like, I'm not wild about it, but I guess it's fine. But when I said I wasn't happy about it, I meant like I'm really, really distressed. I then felt doubly hurt because I was like, wow, he's willing to do this thing even though it's hurting me. And he felt really confused because he felt like, well, why did you say yes if you didn't want it to happen? So the apple metaphor that I came up with was that basically I had like an apple cart and I felt like I had really clearly labeled the apple as being $500, but that he purchased it assuming it was $5 because who would price an apple at $500? He was like, oh, well, I assumed it was just that, it was just like 5.00. And I'm like, there's no decimal on that sign. And he's like, but that's insane. That's the origin of the apple metaphor, which maybe I cut out. Now something that he'll say to me, instead of asking like, is this okay or not? He'll say, how much is that apple? I feel like that makes me freer to be honest about the emotional cost rather than just saying yes or no. I can be like, hey, that apple is $10. Maybe you want to spend $10 on it. Maybe you don't. Or I'll say like, oh, that apple is like only $1. It's like not even a big deal. Or like, oh, that's a free apple. Like, I don't care at all. That's a metaphor that's really helped us and that we've shared with some of our friends. So I wanted to share it with you guys and hopefully it'll help you too. And overall, I'm going to put this in good 101. This is talking about your partner's other partners, your metamors. You may find yourself considering forming a liaison with this person yourself. We suggest a bit of soul searching to make sure your motivation is loving or lustful rather than vengeful or competitive. Then, if you test clean, go for it. No, 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 no. No, I'm sorry. I reread it and I was like, no. Hashtag not all metamors. Some people have great experiences dating their metamors. It is not a 101 activity, okay? That dating your metamors is hard. I personally have a policy that I don't do it, and guess how I got that fucking policy? It was... Okay? I want you to look into my eyes and see the story. Do not date your metamors. Unless you're at like a 301 poly level, in which case you know how hard it is. Even if you think that you want that to be your life someday, if you're still at the early stages where ethical slut is going to be useful to you, you are probably not ready to date your metamor. I am so sorry. This is my hot take, but like so much drama can be avoided if you just don't date your metamours. Just consider them off limits. And some people can do it. I absolutely know people who date their metamours. They are generally people who have years of non-monogamy experience. And like the fact that they're so cavalier about it, I think is what bothers me. Yeah, mention that it's an option, because it is. It's a free country. You can do what you want. But the fact that they don't mention that it makes non-monogamy exponentially trickier and more dramatic, honestly, I think is like a little irresponsible. You're an adult, you can do what you want, but I am gonna put dating your metas into don't do this. Also on the topic of metamour relations, we've both spent many long telephone conversations reassuring our metamours that yes, it's really okay and have a great time, honey. At minimum, we suggest that you try to provide some reassurance that this is not a competition, that you are not being harmed by anything that's going on, and that you are able to take care of your own emotions. And I do want to issue a correction, because I know I said in a TikTok that you should reassure your metamours that you're not a threat. And it's not quite that. They say reassure them that it's not competition, which is still weird. It's still weird. That's very awkward. Like if you want to build a relationship with your metamours, there are toned down versions of this that can kind of work. Like I had a friend who became a metamour, and I really appreciated that she reached out to me and was like, hey, just want to let you know that I really enjoyed getting to know Matt, and make sure that you know that I'm available for any questions that you have, or if there's anything you want to talk about. I appreciated that. I thought that was really sweet. But there's not an obligation to do that. And some people will not think it's sweet. Some people will just be like, why are you talking to me? So you really have to gauge the situation. And you know, the best person to give you advice on the situation is the hinge partner, which is what we are coming back to. If you don't know, hinge partner that's the person who connects the two metamours. So like, this is me, this is my metamour, this is the person we're both dating, the hinge. Oh God, rant incoming. I'm so sorry. Oh God. It's like, okay. You know how whenever there's an advice column that's like, my mother-in-law kicks me every day and pokes me in the eye with a broom, and my husband says I should just let her be because she's never gonna change, and the advice columnist is like, you don't have an in-law problem, you have a husband problem. That's often how I feel when there's a situation where it seems like two metamours really dislike each other, or there's a lot of drama between the two of them. Very often it's not a metamour issue so much as it's a hinge partner issue. Sometimes there really is a thing where it's just a personality clash, it's just an oil and water thing. But very often there is something that the hinge could be doing, whether that's not repeating every rude thing one metamour says about the other, setting boundaries about like, hey, I'm not the person to talk to about your problems with my partner, just to like compartmentalize the drama away from the two people. Or if someone is just behaving badly, stepping up and saying, hey, you can't act like that to my partner. That's really rude. There was a metamour I had who really, really got under my skin. And I complained about them to my boyfriend, and he was like, you also weren't on your best behavior. I was like, you know what? That is true. I was not as friendly as I could have been. I was not as outgoing as I could have been. Like, let me really try to make them feel welcome and taken care of. That did not work. They continued to be so rude to me that eventually Matt was like, this is now an insult to us as a couple. They are being so rude to you that it's like an affront to the crown. He set that boundary with them of like, if you are going to keep behaving like this toward Lily, I cannot see you anymore. I also do see this as a very gendered thing. I feel like I see a lot of is hinges who are men or masculine people looking at their partners who are women or femmes with a vibe of like, I'll just let you ladies work it out. And it really feels to me like another example of women being treated as the emotional working class. There's a lot of talk with poly people about like owning your own feelings and being responsible for your own stuff and not putting it on other people. And it's very easy to take that and say like, oh, well, if you have a problem with your metamour, that's between you and the metamour. To a certain extent, that is true. People are responsible for their own stuff. And maybe it really is just an issue between you and the metamour. But I have never seen a situation between two metamours who disliked each other where the hinge partner couldn't do at least something to mitigate it. And I have found that the correlation between hinge partners who did choose to step up and mitigate things had a lot to do with gender. Very rarely do I see two men who are dating the same woman calling each other up and being like, hey bro, it's all good, we're not in competition, bro. I don't want to say it never happens. I do know circumstances where it has, but generally the majority of this type of emotional work gets put on women and femmes. So honestly, I'm gonna put that in what the fuck. I'll also take this moment to just add the asterisk that this is a very kitchen table oriented book. read it knowing that it has that bias, and you don't have to be kitchen table if that's not something that works for you. These people are, and it seems like it's been magical for them, but that's not everyone's experience. And I've got a video that explains all of these terms. This advice also feels like it stems from an assumption of monogamous people who are opening their relationships, or people who are poly but hierarchical. It really feels like it is geared toward that set, because if you're in more of like a relationship anarchist style, it's going to be extra weird to reach out and do the type of soothing and have the type of conversations that the book is advocating for. And I know I'm supposed to be off of this topic, but I just saw something else that I want to talk about, where it says, we all want to collaborate on creating a happy outcome where everybody gets respected and everybody gets their needs met and their desires fulfilled. In the long run, we are all on the same side. And that is true in an ideal world, but this is a very rosy view. And sometimes you have metamors who really do not have your best interests at heart. Hopefully they do. I hope that for you, but I've also hoped it for myself. It doesn't always happen. And this book does not acknowledge that sometimes you will have a metamor acting in bad faith. And then it goes on to say, this is the thing I'm supposed to be talking about now. Taking care of a partner's partner by sharing sex with them is optional for both of you. Good. I'm so glad that it's optional. I'm glad the IRS isn't going to pursue me for sex evasion. That being like a way of like taking care of your metamor feels weird. It just feels like kind of weird framing. Like technically what they're saying is correct, but the framing is weird, which is my problem with a lot of the issues that I have in this book. I've already talked about why I think having sex with your metamors is dicey. This is pretty innocuous, and it might be helpful to someone who feels like they are being pressured into having a sexual relationship with a metamor. So overall, I'm just gonna give it a very mild really. This is one of my favorite stories in the book, and by favorite, I mean it's buck wild. This is from Dossie. She says, I was once in a relationship with a man who had a primary partner whom I had not met. I had asked to meet her, and she was considering whether she felt safe enough to do so. Their arrangement was that when Patrick had a date with me, Louisa would make a date with her other lover, and everybody would hopefully feel safe and taken care of. After much back and forth, Louisa finally agreed to meet with me. She did agree that Patrick could see me whether or not she had a date, and we would make sure that she got plenty of advance notice, that he got home on time, and that she would get lots of support from both of us. As we worked through this, Louisa and I got closer and closer. I particularly remember one night when we were worried about Patrick and sat up late talking about him while he slept in the next room. Patrick and I wound up growing apart as lovers, but the friendship between Louisa and me carried on. Couple things. The whole, she got a lot of support from both of us. I think that can be an unrealistic expectation to have of your metamor, to get emotional support from them, but good, great, fine. I'm not going to tell you you can't be friends. The whole, we were worried about Patrick and sat up late talking about him. It's two women talking about a man doing emotional work on his behalf, and he's asleep. He's doing the least work. He's doing the least work that anyone could be doing. He is a full asleep man. And two women are like, oh no, poor Patrick. The whole vibe is just very weird. I'm not trying to take away the good things that people get from metamor relationships. But again, this feels like women being the emotional working class. He's taking a nippity nap. I'd be actually super uncomfy if people were talking about how worried they were about me while I was asleep. The whole thing here makes me really uncomfy. I've lost my train of thought. I'm just mad about stuff. WTF. WTF for Patrick and Louisa. In the chapter on safer sex, they give some advice about lube. Check lubricants on tender places for allergic reactions. Not fun to discover when you are all excited that it itches inside and you have to go wash that stuff out right now. I'm going to put that in hot tip. Then they say some weirder stuff about lube. They say, get playful, spill some lube and roll around in it. If you want to put something on your body, coconut oil. We have heard of one dedicated fellow who managed to put on 18 condoms at once. He said the tight squeeze felt really good. My man, my brother in Christ, buy a C-ring. It's just a weird use of something that's pretty expensive. I feel like you could tell that this book was written before like the student debt explosion, because none of my friends would waste their money on I can't stop you. It's not dangerous. Don't do this. Here's an exercise that I hadn't heard before that I actually think is pretty good. Choose a very concrete goal to focus on, one about which you have some anxiety. Think about the steps you would have to take to get from here to there, agreements, negotiations, asking for what you want, scheduling time, finding a babysitter, so on. Write each of these steps on an index card, then lay out the cards and put them in order from the easiest to the hardest or from the safest to the scariest, according to how intense it feels when you think about that step. Then pick the safest, easiest card, figure out how you could take that step and march onward. When you've accomplished that and learned whatever you learned from doing it, put the card away and go to work on the next step, which is now the easiest step. Never take anything but the easiest step. I'd never heard that exercise before, and I think it's pretty good. It's important to build those small, manageable wins so that you get some momentum, as opposed to trying to do the hardest thing and then feeling really bad. I'm going to give that a hot tip. This is about feeling competitive with your partner when you're on the dating scene. And it says, one strategy to cut through any feelings of competitiveness is to play matchmaker for each other, to invest yourself in your partner's sexual happiness as much as you do in your own. Some polyfolk use the word compersion to describe the feeling of joy that comes from seeing your partner sexually happy with someone else. If you meet someone who you think is great for your partner and you set them up, that's awesome. I've done that. People I know have done that. When it really does come from a place of like, you like the thing, oh, it needs to be together. I took way too negative a tone. That can absolutely be great, but I really object to it being framed as a way to cope with a feeling of competitiveness, because it can be another way of feeling in control of a situation that feels out of control. I think you have to really be conscious of your motivations going in. I have absolutely been the person who meddles too much. I was talking to one of my besties. I was like, I'm always trying to help Matt out. And she was like, it's not that you're trying to help him out. It's that you want to put your fingerprints on everything in his life. And I was like, that is firm but fair. So I think you have to really check your motivations. So overall, I'd give this a mixed feelings, I think. All right, this is some true advice about how to act right at a sex party. Responsibility and voyeurism is a must. You may watch what people do in public spaces, but always from a respectful distance. If the participants are aware of your presence, you are too close. Whether or not it is okay to masturbate, can I say that? Whether or not it is okay to while watching varies from place to place, but it's always polite to keep your own excitement discreet enough that you don't distract the good folks who are putting on such a nice show. Also be aware that when you are close to people who are playing, they can hear you. This is not an appropriate place to tell your friend all about your awful boss or your recent experiences at the proctologist. 100% true. I'm so glad they said this, because there are absolutely people who come in not knowing how to act. Something my partner Shade always says is, the more you're enjoying watching, the farther back you need to stand. If you see some people doing their thing and you're like, oh yeah, I guess it's okay, you could probably stand pretty close and not creep them out. But if you're like, this is everything I've ever wanted, you need to back the hell up. Different venues do have different rules about doing your own thing. I always think it's a little tacky. I was originally thinking like, oh, that's good 101, but honestly, there are so many people who don't know how to act. I'm gonna put it in hot tip. This next point is big and sprawling and gets to the heart of some of my issues with the framing of the book. We'll talk about it as we go. We are proud to reclaim the word slut as a term of approval, even endearment. To us, a slut is a person of any gender who celebrates sexuality according to the radical proposition that sex is nice and pleasure is good for you. Very fourth wave, very reclamatory, very BuzzFeed, very girl boss, very babe.net. And I don't love it. I don't mind using the word slut to get attention. I don't mind them using it to sell copies. I'm personally not super interested in using the word slut to self-describe. I know some people are. I'm not trying to take that away from them. Carolyn Burke is someone who really influenced my thinking on this, so shout out to them. The word slut as a pejorative is used to describe a woman who has too much sex, essentially. And to me, I'm like, oh, that's just not a real thing. A woman who has too much sex is like a cute NFT. We don't need a word for that because it doesn't ever happen. What I'm more interested in is just getting rid of the concept. And at the same time that I make this argument, I also acknowledge that I am exactly the type of person who someone could describe as a slut in a pejorative way with a pretty straight face. I'm a woman who is non-monogamous, bisexual, I've had an above average number of partners, I'm dedicated to sex positivity. All of those things can absolutely get you labeled a slut by other people. And then because there's been this reclamatory push in the fourth wave, people who don't necessarily share all of those demographics will use slut as what they think is a compliment toward me. There's a part of me that's like, there is no in-group for that word. It's a made up word. It's a made up concept. And then there's also part of me that's like, but I am the in group. I know I am the in group. And when people who I perceive as being kind of the out group of that use the word slut, especially to describe me, it makes me uncomfortable. I think you have to be very careful when you are reclaiming a term. Just in general. That's just a general hot tip. Like, I don't want to blow your minds, but sometimes reclaiming terms is controversial. Especially because the boundaries of sluthood are so ill-defined, because again, it's a pretty made-up concept. I think it can be hard to know whether you're in group or out group. I'm sure that a lot of the people who have used that word for me in a way that they thought was complimentary generally did consider themselves in group. Even if it was just like, oh, well, I'm also a woman who has sex, so I'm also a slut and I can also use that word for you. Or like, oh, I'm also a non-monogamous person, so even though I'm a man, I can use the word slut for you. And that's fine because I'm in the in group. When they define slut in the back, they define it as a person who celebrates sexuality and erotic love with an open mind and an open heart. It's kind of like their definition of sex, where they've just broadened it so much. When you have a made-up group of people, how do you decide who's in the in group? And when these authors take this really broad attitude towards sluthood, I think it becomes an even more useless concept. They talk about how you can be a celibate slut or an asexual slut, and that's not a contradiction at all. And they talk about how many talking points ace people and ethical sluts have in common, which to me is saying like, okay, ace people are politically aligned with people we would call sluts. There is a difference between being politically aligned and actually being part of the same group. When the book describes sluthood as believing that sex is nice and pleasure is good for you, I think it is more accurate to just describe that as sex positivity than to encourage the reclaiming of this pejorative by such a wide group of people. When it came to like, and there are celibate sluts and asexual sluts and monogamous sluts. And I was like, okay. It's further complicated by the fact that depending on how you were raised, enjoying sex at all, even in the context of a monogamous heterosexual pairing, could feel really slutty. I think it's a really complex issue and that the book radically oversimplified it. I know I'm making a long section longer, but if an ace person called me a slut because they felt like it was their word, I would want to gather more information. Asexuality is a big umbrella, and there are definitely ace people, especially demisexuals or gray asexuals, who are also bisexual, non-monogamous women with an above average number of sexual partners, so they're just as in group as I am. But if your sole justification for being part of the in group is that you think it's nice when flowers bloom, because this book lists that as a type of sex, I don't think you should expect solidarity if you call people sluts. If a monogamous heterosexual man called me a slut and then was like, no, it's okay, I embrace sexuality. Like, do I wreck this man's home literally or figuratively? Do I plant a bomb or do I steal his wife? It seems Dossie and Janet want to call everyone they think is cool a slut. Like, I think St. Elizabeth of Hungary is cool. Does that mean she's a slut? No. And please tell me your thoughts in the comments, because I'd love to know how y'all are thinking about this issue. For now, I'm gonna put this in mixed feelings. Man, if that wasn't ranty enough, ooh, baby, you're in for a treat. We're gonna start with this story. Dossie, giving a lecture on consent to about 200 people, asked those who had never been SA'd to stand up. Only about a quarter stood up, mostly men, some women. That large number of people who remained sitting, let's admire their courage and determination to free themselves and their sexuality even though someone hurt them. I am so mad. And unfortunately, I have seen educators do similar things where they're like, raise your hand if your consent has ever been violated, or raise your hand if you've ever violated someone's consent. Do not do that to people in a public setting where they are not expecting it. There were people in that crowd getting the thigh burn of a lifetime, just being like, well, I don't know if my experience counts. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. I'm not sure. I'm still processing this. Do I want to tell all these people? But if I don't tell all these people, are they going to think I'm lying if I talk about it later? Like, this is such a shitty thing to do to people. It's not going to add anything to your class. No one is going to be like, you know what my favorite part of that class is when we all had to talk about our trauma histories. Don't confuse a culture of making it okay to talk about SA with making that like a conversation starter. Nobody owes you their trauma history. And I don't want to be too terribly harsh on Dossie, because I know that she does talk a little bit about the stuff that she's gone through. This is not the way to act. This is not the way to act. And I wish I had more rage, because that would be like spicy and hot, but it's 2 a.m. and all I've got is like, don't do that. And I know that makes it sound like it's going to be in the don't do this category, but it's going to be a what the fuck. We're going to end on a lighter note. Why have you never heard your neighbors having sex? Why have they never heard you? See how much noise you and your partner can make the next time you make love. Smile when you see your neighbors. This is just rude to do to your neighbors. This is also clearly written in a time when people could afford to live in detached single houses with like yards. Pretty much everyone I know shares walls with people. There's nothing revolutionary about people being able to hear you. I don't think you're gonna get anything out of it besides a slightly annoyed neighbor who's then gonna steal your recycling bin. So I'm gonna put that in don't do this. And that is all I have. I hope that this gives you a picture of what you can expect in this book. Even with all of its flaws, I do still recommend it. It's a great 101 text. It's a classic for a reason. Please like and subscribe and leave me all of your thoughts in the comments. Really appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you next time.